So here's a question for you. Why did the rise of philosophy, art, and drama in ancient Greece, all the things we hold up as the peak of civilization, why did that signal not a golden age of freedom, but the death of their gods and the ultimate triumph of the state?
It sounds completely backwards, doesn't it?
It really does. We celebrate these things, these achievements, as the absolute pinnacle of human liberty. But our source material today suggests they were maybe the most beautiful mask ever created for power.
That's it. That is the necessary setup. It's the beautiful lie, really, that allows coercion to not just survive, but to thrive. We have this idea that civilization is synonymous with progress.
Right.
But the material we're diving into today suggests that, well, maybe civilization is just the refined, armored apparatus of state control.
Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand. Our mission in this deep dive is to try and strip away some of that academic varnish from history and philosophy. You know, the traditional narrative we all get in school. And what's underneath is this stark, perpetual, existential drama. And that drama is the war between the free individual, what our sources call the whole joyous human, and this huge, man-eating, earth-wrecking artificial worm we call the state, the Leviathan.
We are absolute cutting through history to understand the mechanics of power, not just memorizing the names of kings and battles.
Exactly.
And the core tension here, the reason this matters, is this fundamental existential itch that just echoes across millennia.
Okay.
How does the individual, the human being, who the text suggests, and I love this phrase, used to fly, how do you hold on to your essential humanity, your joy, your freedom, when the entire apparatus of civilization demands crushing conformity?
And constant tribute and endless war.
Constant tribute, endless war, exactly. We're tracking the moment that initial freedom, that vision, that spiritual energy gets co-opted, armored, and then weaponized by the very mechanism it was supposed to overthrow.
So we're about to go on a rapid-fire tour across Eurasia. We're tracing the rise of this armored empire and, just as importantly, the kind of decentralized spiritual resistance it created.
We'll start with a huge visionary movement, and we're going to end with the quiet resignation of the individual.
Watching exactly how a crisis of the spirit turns into a new system of political and economic control, time and time and time again.
And to navigate this, we really have to define the players. We need to get into the engine room of the argument, you know?
Right. The terminology.
Our sources focus on two interlocking ideas. First, you have the Leviathan. That's simple enough. It's the massive tribute-collecting state or empire. It's the body.
The institution.
The institution,
Yeah.
built for survival and expansion. But second, and this is the more subtle danger, is the armor and the mask.
Okay, break that down.
The armor is the physical stuff. The military, the bureaucracy, the laws, the taxes. It's the coercive layer that keeps the Leviathan moving and demands total conformity.
And the mask. What's the mask?
The mask is the rhetorical layer. The cultural, the philosophical layer that conceals the armor. It's the beauty, the drama, the philosophy, the official religion.
Wow.
It's what makes all that coercion look necessary or, maybe even beautiful. It's the mechanism of self-deception that lets the people running the Leviathan sleep at night.
And lets the people living under it believe they're free.
That's the one.
It's fascinating how the text points out that when these various groups, the Guti, the Kosites, even the early Mycenaean Greeks, when they arrived in these cradles of civilization, they sort of forgot their past.
Kind of amnesia.
Yeah, cultural amnesia. They repressed the memory of a time before the Leviathan, before the state system.
Yeah.
The Greek poet Hesiod, writing much later, could only remember this vague, mythological golden past.
With no real details.
No social or historical details at all. It was like this amnesia was required for civilization to function without constant, existential revolt.
Precisely. But this is why we start with the Persians. Because with them, we get a crucial historical data point. They actually remembered a movement, or at least a visionary figure, who fundamentally challenged that state structure. Zarathustra. And this fragile memory, no matter how fractured or later abused it became, it gives us our starting point for understanding how this free vision collides with and is ultimately swallowed by the armored empire.
So we're tracking the moment the state figured out how to use the revolutionaries' own language against him.
Exactly, the ultimate co-option.
Okay, let's unpack this Zarathustra memory.
Okay.
The revolutionary ideas that defined it. Our source material, it compresses Hesiod's long description of human decline, the ages of silver, bronze, iron.
Yeah.
It boils all that down to two absolutely fundamental states. This is the core binary that really defines the entire conflict we're tracking.
It is. It's very simple, very dramatic. The world is divided into inside the Leviathan and outside the Leviathan, that's it.
So outside.
The outside world, the natural uncoerced existence, is defined as light, or Ahura Mazda. And this concept is immediately tied to the foundational elements: fire, earth, water, animals, plants.
Okay.
It represents that self-sustaining strength, the untamed freedom, the natural harmony that Hesiod could only vaguely remember as some lost golden age.
And the inside world, the world of civilization and structure.
That is darkness. Armen, or, and this is the most critical term, the lie.
A lie.
And the lie isn't just a philosophical untruth, it is the physical mechanism of the Leviathan itself. And at the same time, it's the Leviathanic armor that disrupted the ancient community.
So it's both the cage and the reason you think the cage is good for you.
Exactly. It's the structure and the psychological coding that enforces it on you.
The power of Zarathustra's vision, then, was this explicit rejection of that compromised transactional life that the state forces on you. The text makes a surprising connection to a later thinker, Nietzsche, right? That he understood this implicit demand. Zarathustra called on human beings to rise in stature, to be more than just, and I love this quote, merchants of wine and olives.
It was a call to reclaim an inherent dignity that the state had stripped away, reducing the individual to, what? A mere economic actor. An input.
This was a radical rejection of the whole social contract idea. Zarathustra didn't call for, a polite reform or some academic debate.
No, not at all.
He announced a literal cosmological war of Ahura Mazda against Ahriman. The source is very clear. This was not a polite exodus led by an official.
Right, because the revolutionary understood that Ahriman the lie, it isn't just an external structure out there in the world like a tax collector or a general.
It's inside you.
It's internalized. It resides in your own psyche. So the war had to be waged at the same time against the external Leviathan and against the psychological armor we all unknowingly wear.
And the tool for this total war was elemental. It was fire.
Fire, yeah. Fire was the agent of purification. The idea was to burn off the mask of compliance, burn out the psychological armor, and ultimately burn down the Leviathan itself.
But here is the tragic pivot. Here is the warning that defines the entire subsequent history of co-option we're going to talk about.
The warning that gets ignored.
Completely ignored. Zarathustra warned that the entire revolution would fail if that purifying fire fell into the hands of armored men who were already invested in the system of coercion.
And of course, that warning is ignored almost immediately. The visionary fire of Ahura Mazda is appropriated directly by an armored man.
Cyrus, the great-grandson of Achaemenes.
And Cyrus didn't innovate, he just inherited the tried and true coercive methods of the Mesopotamian Leviathans. He'd been trained by the Medes and Elamites.
The source describes him as literally being pulled by his armor. It's like the system, not the man, was dictating his actions.
And this is the critical moment of inversion. This is the genesis of the co-option mechanism we see repeated for thousands of years. The original followers, blinded by their fervent hope, they didn't see the heavy armor Cyrus wore.
What did they see?
All they saw was his mantle, the mantle of Zarathustra. They misinterpreted his expansion of state power as liberation. They believed he was leading them to a genuinely new, free place, not
The same old trap.
the same old trap of tribute and war. The revolutionary zeal became the fuel for the new empire.
And we can see this fatal misunderstanding most clearly through the eyes of the insiders. The text focuses on a man called Isaiah, an armored insider.
Someone already invested in the political structure of the old order.
Right. And so his vision of liberation was incredibly narrow. It was tribal, constrained only to his immediate circle.
Isaiah saw Cyrus as the Messiah, the anointed savior. And his prophecy is so revealing because it perfectly illustrates how the Leviathanic mindset just absorbs the language of hope. Well, he envisions Cyrus subduing nations, breaking doors of brass, cutting iron bars. He saw a powerful agent of change, sure, but what does that vision ultimately rely on?
The tools of the old master.
It relies entirely on the physical armor and the instruments of coercion.
So the ultimate vision of freedom for an armored insider is just swapping one master for another, or seizing the old master's tools to destroy the old monster without ever questioning the concept of the monster itself.
Exactly. It's liberation defined very narrowly. Freedom for my tribe, paid for by the continued servitude of everyone else. It's a zero-sum game of power.
But the broader population, the less armored people, they had much larger existential expectations. They were fueled by this rising widespread revulsion against the Leviathan that was bubbling up all across the continent.
Absolutely. But Cyrus and his son Cambyses, they moved carefully. They avoided the overt, immediate brutality of the Assyrian.
They were more subtle.
Much more. They preferred to rely on sheer scale and appearance to inspire terror and urge submission. They masterfully used that ideological mantle to gather immense power, restoring and expanding the tribute-gathering Leviathan into Egypt and beyond.
And the mantle of Zarathustra worked perfectly to make all of that happen. So here's where the narrative pivots, and it's a dramatic pivot. Because even as Cyrus was building his new armored Persian empire, there was this massive, widespread spiritual and social rejection happening.
The continental wave.
Continental wave.
Yeah.
Our sources identify it as a revulsion from the Strait of Gibraltar to the China Sea. And the sole object of this revulsion was the Leviathan. This wasn't just, localized civil unrest. This was an existential crisis of consciousness.
It truly was. It was a rejection of the foundational principles of a state-driven society. The source paints this incredible picture. Circles of women dancing around fires, celebrating the emergence of new human beings out of the ashes.
All of Eurasia is dancing.
All of Eurasia, symbolically, is dancing. And this is crucial because it was a decentralized, massive social movement responding to the crushing, systematic pressure of the armored state. It was a natural human reaction to being forced into a uniform transactional life.
So if we have to put a label on this dance, the source suggests calling it a generalized rejection of civilization and all its masks and armors. It was this deep desire to return to that fundamental pre-Leviathanic state of wholeness and direct spiritual connection.
And, critically, the text warns us not to apply the term religion to this movement. The way of a free human being is defined as all. There is nothing above it.
And religion is what?
Religion in this analysis is defined explicitly as something that has been mangled and turned into a part of a Leviathan's armor. It's an institution of control that co-opts that genuine spiritual impulse. The true original movement was total rejection. It was a demand for freedom now, not in the afterlife.
We only learn about this massive revulsion from its echoes, right? Because the powerful armies, Cyrus's first and foremost, they actively broke up these dancing circles and repressed the movements.
But the echoes of freedom persisted. They were preserved in 3 key geographical poles of resistance that developed these sophisticated philosophical responses to the Leviathan.
Let's examine those 3 poles, because they really show the different ways people were trying to shed the internal and external armor of the state.
Okay, so first, way over in distant China, we get the visions associated with Laozi.
The way.
The way, exactly. And here, people were actively shedding the psychological armor imposed by social structures, and they were focusing instead on joy from the natural world, the sun rising, the sound of a brook.
As opposed to the state-approved joy.
Right,
Okay.
which was joy from the fall of an enemy and the gushing of blood from a wound. They had this realization that the human being who was so much under the state is becoming very little. Laozi's visions were collected as the way, emphasizing non-coercion, alignment with nature.
Okay, that's pole number 1. Number 2.
Second, in India, we find Gautama, who becomes the Buddha. And the central idea here was the realization that the Leviathan and its whole network of artificial distinctions, hierarchies, castes, laws, were no reality at all.
An illusion.
A complete illusion. So the focus shifted intensely inward, recognizing and actively working to burn out the psychological armor wrapped around your own innards, removing every last splinter of ego and attachment that the state uses for leverage.
And they, too, carried that memory that human beings used to fly.
Yes. And their visions were collected as techniques for removing the mask and armor. It was very practical.
And the third pole was closer to home, in Greece.
Right. The echoes of resistance stayed with the women who continued to dance in these hidden groves, remembering the emergence of a new Dionysus from the spiritual ashes. And it also persisted among musicians and philosophers who gathered with Pythagoras of Samos, trying to renew these original, visceral hopes through mathematics and harmony.
So the text calls this generalized continental phenomenon the main outlines of what an anthropologist, Victor Turner, would later call the crisis cult.
Yes, and it notes the sheer scale of it and states that it precedes Christianity, which would later re-co-opt these same impulses by 25 or 30 generations. This was a massive, foundational, existential reset attempt across the entire known world.
And the inversion mechanism, the state's ability to swallow the revolution, that also precedes Christianity perfectly.
For sure. The text identifies Cyrus wearing Zarathustra's mantle, and then later the Indian ruler Ashoka wearing Buddha's mantle as the clear historical forerunners of Constantine and the popes.
A pattern is set.
The pattern is set. The state takes the revolutionary mask and uses it to justify and expand its existing armor.
So as the centralized state reasserts its dominance, the living, dangerous vision gets neutralized. It gets reduced.
Yes, despite the widespread revulsion, the radical, earthbound visions of Zarathustra are reduced to a religion. People are now urged to remain less, to stay in their political and social place, and to wait for genuine renewal only after they die.
Pushing hope into the afterlife.
Exactly, pushing it safely into the afterlife, where Saoshyant the Savior will raise them across the bridge to the realm of light. This strategy perfectly defangs any immediate threat to the Leviathan.
And this resignation, it prepares the ground for the definitive restoration of the monster. After the political chaos following Cambyses' death, a chaos often spurred by these very revulsion movements, Darius, a distant cousin, he violently repressed the rebels.
And he surrounded himself with highly armored men who were nostalgic for the brutal efficiency of Assyria. He systematically repaired the tribute-gathering Leviathan.
And immediately, what does he do? He proclaims himself king of the realm by the grace of Ahura Mazda.
Of course he does. The revolutionary mantle is now officially and permanently cemented onto the state's armor. The hope that individuals had managed to keep alive, the source says, and this is chilling, now rots inside them because the spiritual path has been co-opted.
And the historians will call Darius the Great.
They'll call him the Great because he successfully restored Assyrian methods and structure to a Leviathan that stretched from the Nile to the Indus. He made the machine bigger and more efficient.
There's a sobering note on Egypt here, too. Egypt, the world's wealthiest kingdom, gets incorporated into the Persian structure and almost overnight becomes the world's poorest colony. They finally remember why their walls were built in the first place.
To defend against exactly this kind of cycle.
Right. But there is one crucial failure that sets the stage for the next great inversion we're going to talk about. Darius tries to swallow the one group that remains truly outside the system, the Scythians.
The fleet riders of the steppe.
And he fails.
Yeah.
Catastrophically. His armored army just cannot comprehend how people can live without labor gangs, finding no city, no palace, no temple.
To the armored man, this free pastoral life is simply wilderness.
It's just chaos. Darius realizes his massive army is not yet big enough to fully assimilate that wilderness, and so he turns his attention toward the Aegean, toward the Greeks.
And that failure, it highlights this crucial recurring problem for the Leviathan. It cannot fully assimilate true non-economic freedom. It doesn't know what to do with it. So when the Persians finally tangle with the Greeks, these people who are called the Mushki on ancient tablets, they encounter a profound shift in the mechanism of control.
Okay.
These Greeks, they're highly skilled Phoenician-style merchants of wine and olives using Phoenician characters, but their new city-states, the polis, are fundamentally weak in a traditional military sense.
Why is that?
Because their structure is based on floating wealth. It's based on trade, which means they can't easily feed large, long-term armies that you need for a traditional land empire.
That Phoenician lineage is a key insight. Like their maritime mentors, the Greeks couldn't bear to see themselves as just merchants focused on profit.
Right, but critically, their spiritual connection is completely broken. The text argues the temple is not where the gods reside. The gods are in agora, the marketplace.
Wow.
The market, the process of wealth circulation, that is the true God they worship, even if they won't admit it to themselves.
And Darius, despite his, ingrained Leviathanic cynicism, he recognized something genuinely unique about the Greeks, that they were becoming secular.
Yes, they understood their gods were dead. The temples were just empty shells. Our source notes that the Greeks had achieved this secularism almost at the same time as the distant Chinese. It was this massive continental turning point.
And how do we know they knew the gods were dead?
Well, when they listened to a recitation of Hesiod's myths, the stories of their own spiritual past, they didn't concentrate on the meaning or the spiritual truth. They concentrated solely on counting the strophes in the lines.
On the meter, on the form.
On the form, not the content. It's the ultimate intellectual distance from the sacred. And to mask this existential dread of being seen as mere profit seekers, they focused on the aesthetic, the lines, forms, and colors of the roofs and columns.
They transformed what were once sacred, functional, spiritual activities of the temple into pure, decorative ornament.
And this transformation is the core inversion mechanism of Greek civilization. It defines the next 2,000 years of power dynamics. They actively ransacked the temple's spiritual and communal functions and relocated them to the agora, the marketplace, or the structures around it.
Things that held total spiritual reality for their ancestors.
Lost all reality for the Greeks, they were turned into political and cultural masks.
Okay, let's follow this transfer of the sacred. Let's track the birth of art as the mask.
Let's do it.
So the great communal spiritual enactments of the past were reduced to mere drama, a performance for entertainment.
Right. And the shrines, built for worship, became mere architecture, admired for its geometry.
Profound internal visions. Once the source of revelation, they were externalized and reduced to painting and sculpture. Art, admired only for form and color.
Internal probings for truth became specialized philosophy, a complex academic discipline.
And the communal sharing of truth became simple, political rhetoric, the art of persuasion in the marketplace.
So the critical philosophical difference is this. For all the Leviathan's predecessors, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the early Persians, the state was fundamentally an instrument for feeding the dead gods in the temple.
The Greeks inverted this completely.
Completely. They took the fragments of the temple, the spiritual tradition, and turned them into mere ornaments of their new Leviathan, the polis.
The only god they truly worship is this polis, the structure of the state itself.
But only a polis that is properly adorned with beautiful art and eloquent philosophy. It's state worship dressed up in the language of freedom and aesthetic beauty.
And this is where the source directly challenges the enduring Greek legacy. Aristotle would later argue that Greek enactments, particularly drama, served to purge people of their psychological armor, to purify them.
Catharsis.
The famous concept of catharsis. But the text argues the exact opposite. These ornaments served exclusively to conceal the armor, to mask the underlying coercion, giving the tribute gathering and power structures the appealing appearance of art and philosophy. They prevent the cleansing.
And the Persians, ever the pragmatists, they quickly imitated the mechanism. Darius learned the lesson well.
Oh, I'm sure.
Soon, Persepolis and Susa were filled with these monumental buildings that were not temples and statues that were not shrines. Architecture rose to prominence, and the Persians who had sought the pure, cleansing light of Ahura Mazda found the safer, more manageable, artificial light of art.
The co-option mechanism proved to be transferable.
Highly. And this Athenian model, after defeating the Persian threat, proved incredibly successful for internal exploitation and external coercion. Athens quickly became a powerhouse, teeming with what the source calls forms of freedom.
If you're only listening to the rhetoric.
Right, but certainly not if you look at the raw economy based on olives, grapes, and human labor.
The Athenian navy coerces the Anatolian cities into the Delian Confederacy, a name the source just dismisses as a rhetorical name for the Athenian Empire.
And this leads to an internal power struggle in Athens. You get the Worm Party, who favored Assyrian-style military concentration, versus the Octopus Party, led by Pericles.
The Octopus Party.
The merchants. They prevailed because they understood that Athenian wealth came from freely moving tentacles, unrestricted commodity circulation, trade, colonial exploitation. A vast centralized military would just eat up the sources of wealth.
So Pericles is celebrated by history as a defender of freedom, but the text clarifies a crucial distinction.
He defends the freedom of commodity circulation, not the freedom of people.
And the evidence for that contradiction is pretty stark.
It is. 2/3 of the metropolis population were forced laborers, what the text refers to as zeks, engaged in backbreaking mining and quarrying.
So Athens was just another tribute payer, like the Persian Empire. It just outsourced its military and glorified its economic coercion with culture.
And the function of those Periclean, supremely beautiful architectural works, the Parthenon, the statues, the drama, all paid for by imperial tribute extracted from subject cities, was singular.
Which was
to conceal the claws and tentacles, first of all, from the Athenians themselves. Art became the ultimate layer of denial, allowing the merchant class to see themselves as sophisticated connoisseurs and citizens, rather than slave drivers and imperial plunderers.
Our source material is very clear that this period of profound self-deception in Athens led to, well, an inevitable overreach.
Hubris.
Flushed with imperial power, Pericles and his merchants tried to grab Corinth's outposts, an act the Athenians themselves, using their own philosophy, would call hubris blind arrogance, a defiance of natural limits.
And this hubris led directly to the Peloponnesian War, a generation of fratricidal and genocidal war that destroyed the concept of the polis forever.
So after decades of this violence, Athens is militarily broken. It's reduced to just another polis, overloaded with beautiful monuments of past glory, but desperately poor.
The mask is still there, but the armor has been shattered.
And in their weakness, the Athenians become ironically pious. They order the execution of Socrates for announcing their gods were dead.
The irony being, of course, that the gods had been dead for ages. But without the cover of their art, their drama, their successful philosophy, the Athenians were exposed as only wine and olive merchants, and now second-rate ones.
They couldn't bear the unadorned truth of their own existence.
Not at all. And the philosophical fallout from this catastrophe defines the entire Western tradition. All that was left was Plato's attempt to found the ideal Leviathan, the perfect polis.
Plato's the ultimate Athenian. He speaks the language of the temple, focusing intensely on the ornaments that conceal the armor. He genuinely believed that the state could be humane if its citizens were properly educated and classified.
And his theory relies entirely on the mask. Plato believed, for example, that forced laborers would be happy if someone just explained to them, using beautiful rhetoric, that some people are born to squeeze the juices.
The labor.
And others are born to sell them, the merchants and rulers. The rhetorical mask is absolutely vital to his ideal state. It justifies the coercion through intellectual means.
But here's the critical comparative moment that the source emphasizes for understanding the structure of civilization. Plato doesn't know this, but his exact contemporary in distant China, Xiangyang, minister to the Duke of Qin,
is devising an almost identical theory of state control, but, and this is the key, using the language of the Leviathan itself, entirely unadorned.
No frills.
No frills whatsoever. Xiangyang believed that Plato's philosophical frills and artistic ornaments were not only useless, but actively detrimental to state efficiency.
So Xiangyang's ideal polis is the pure, chilling mechanism of the state, stripped bare of all humane pretense. This is the core binary in its most brutal practice, the Leviathan without the mask.
Let's detail the Xiangyang mechanism because it is a ruthless blueprint for total control, which, spoiler alert, proved ultimately successful in unifying China.
Okay, step one.
1. Make peasant land a marketable commodity. This sounds like a simple economic reform, but it's a direct attack on communal resilience. It injects competition and vulnerability right into the traditional kinship structure.
2. Merchants, empowered by this new market system, quickly impoverish the peasants, drive them into debt, strip them of their autonomy.
Which is the natural, inevitable outcome of introducing pure market forces into fragile, traditional communities.
3. The Duke, the Leviathan, then expropriates the land, either through debt or just direct seizure.
And this action definitively breaks those kinship ties and creates a huge, desperate, landless pool of laborers and armies, exactly the mass of disposable workers you need for the Leviathan to function and expand.
4. The entire Leviathan is bonded solely by coercion and terror. Social control is maximized by turning the population against itself. Elders are mandated to be secret police watching their neighbors.
The entire ethical argument of the state is reduced to immediate, overwhelming terror and punishment.
5. Crucially, music, poetry, morality, philosophy, they're all liquidated.
Gone. They're seen as subversive ornaments that distract from the machine's singular ends. Any form of cultural expression or intellectual reflection that might foster an individual conscience has to be destroyed.
And 6, the final piece.
The sole stated purpose of the state is enlargement by perpetual war and preparation for war. There's no concept of a golden age, no pursuit of internal happiness. It is a pure, killing and consuming machine.
The clash of ideals, then, is brutal and telling. Plato's adorned ideal, wrapped in rhetoric and philosophy, was rejected by the Syracusan tyrant Dionysius.
But Xiangyang's unadorned, efficient vision was accepted immediately by the Duke of Qin. The apparatus of pure, state-sanctioned terror was found to be far more practical and successful than the apparatus of beautiful deceit.
Meanwhile, back in Greece, Plato's student, Aristotle, systematizes the master's ornamental wisdom, puts it into textbooks for his academy.
And eventually teaches Alexander the Macedonian.
It was Alexander's father, Philip, who really understood the land-born advantage. He was repairing a rusty segment of Darius's abandoned realm, and he knew intrinsically that a sea-born octopus like Athens was no match for a disciplined, land-born military worm.
Especially one exhausted by decades of fratricidal war.
The last defender of the Athenian octopus, Demosthenes, he spoke rhetoric. the ornamented language that concealed the underlying rot.
The text suggests Demosthenes was using the wrong language entirely. He should have spoken like Shengyang.
With unadorned truth.
With unadorned truth. He should have warned the Athenians, if Philip stays, your ships will empty, your trade will collapse, and you will become as poor as your slaves. But the Athenians preferred the beautiful, ornamented lie.
And the inevitable result was the end of an era. When Philip enters, the Greek polis is completely over. Leviathanized humanity has taken another great step up the ladder towards centralized power.
And Philip the Macedonian is now a name known to every schoolchild, a monument to the triumph of the land-born military worm over the fractured merchant state.
And we can't forget the fate of the last great polis, Syracuse. The text says they abandoned the beautiful deception, using butcher's knives instead of painter's brushes.
And their visionary Archimedes, a genius of engineering, he sold his power, his absolute intellectual capacity, to a tyrant.
He boasted, "Give me a place to stand and I'll move the world." The language of utility and control.
And when his brilliant machines killed Romans and protected the tyrant, his famous shout, "Eureka!" translated not into philosophical discovery, but chillingly into, "It works."
And that boast, it signaled a lethal future where intellectual endeavor serves solely the machinery of labor gangs and killing machines. Philip is assassinated, and his 20-year-old son, Alexander, allows himself to be called the Great. He spends his youth chasing the paths of ancient conquerors, becoming King of Kings, Lord of Lords.
But he ultimately achieves nothing new in terms of societal structure, just massive geographic scale. He burns out in Babylon at 33, leaving this impossibly vast, unwieldy empire.
And, as expected, his empire immediately decomposes. It's carved up by his strongmen, the Diadochi.
And the first thing these new strongmen do, having become kings of kings themselves, is cover their fangs and claws with Greek ornaments and forms of freedom.
The mask is immediately reapplied.
Immediately. But the armor is now vast, militarized, multinational, and it's overseen by a Greek-speaking elite.
The reality of life under these successors, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, was incredibly harsh for the average person. The very Greeks who had initially welcomed Philip's perceived strength were now shackled.
Shackled by relentless tribute collections, conscript hunts, and night searches. This is the foundation of the modern state. High taxes, mandatory military service, and comprehensive, often violent, law and order.
And the official history, the history written by the state, by the historians, as our sources call them, records this brutal sequence of atrocities as an edifying sequence of advances for mankind.
Right, focusing on new cities and trade routes. But the people who lived it did not experience it as human progress. They experienced it as sustained systemic oppression.
And this intense, continuous military and economic pressure led directly to a complete philosophical shift, the Great Withdrawal.
The energetic enthusiasm of the polis builders gives way entirely to the quiet resignation of the Zeks, the forced laborers, and the compliant population.
We see this expressed perfectly in the arts. The playwright Menander, he encapsulated this spiritual malaise, this resignation, reflecting, "Wisest is he who has fewest expectation, and happiest who dies young."
Wow. The radical hope of the crisis cult is completely gone. It's replaced by a philosophy of quiet, rational despair.
Then we see the birth of the Great Withdrawal philosophies, which reject the entire structure of the Leviathan. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, completely lacks the civic patriotism that defined Plato and Aristotle.
In Zeno's view, everything in the Leviathanic world is an impersonal, necessary evil. Therefore, the only path is internal fortitude, acceptance, and rigorous self-control.
Epicurus goes even further. He states that hell is not some fiery underworld, but the man-made world you currently inhabit, the world of politics and ambition.
The gods are too remote or indifferent to help, so the only rational choice for the wise individual is to live unobtrusively, remove yourself from the cycle of state aggression and desire.
And the cynics, they push the anti-state sentiment to its logical extreme. They state explicitly that there is nothing human about the Leviathan at all.
And the only human alternative is to disregard polity completely, to be truly stateless, and live solely by your own conscience, rejecting all societal masks, armor, and conventions.
This mass, coordinated resistance through philosophical rejection and withdrawal, it's often the most significant moment in human history.
Precisely because it is almost always skipped in accounts of his story. It's either ignored entirely or compartmentalized and explained away as merely early religion, or minor philosophy.
Yet the text argues these expressions of radical individualism and conscience are the only parts of the story that have any genuine human meaning.
All the rest is just, as they say, a tale of worms eating each other.
The cycle of conquest continues relentlessly because the mechanisms of control remain. Alexander's successors are merely rival Leviathans trying to eat each other.
And they eventually get devoured by new, dynamic, pastoral nomads Parni tribes, who establish a massive Parthian Leviathan stretching over the eastern provinces.
Simultaneously, in China, Zhang successfully puts Shangyang's pure, unadorned, brutal precepts into practice with terrifying efficiency.
And he becomes Shi Huangti, the first emperor of a unified Chinese Leviathan. The unmasked state proves its ultimate viability.
And while all the Mediterranean powers remain fixed on their local struggles, Syracuse versus the Carthaginian octopus, the true unseen threat is growing in the shadows.
A worm no one can see yet. A worm called Rome, which has perfected the blend of ruthless military efficiency and subsequent civic ornamentation, and which will eventually swallow them all. The process is cyclical and constantly evolving.
So let's try to synthesize this vast Eurasian sweep of history. We've established the core binary that runs beneath all of civilization, the free living vision, which values wholeness and joy,
Versus the armored state, which demands coercion and conformity.
and the consistent engine driving history is the inversion, how the state always manages to seize the rhetoric of freedom, the mantle or the mask, and use it to expand and justify brutal, systematic coercion, the armor.
You could think of the state as an ever-evolving corporate operating system, constantly skinned with the beautiful, revolutionary, or artistic code it sought to destroy. The Leviathan learns the language of freedom, love, and community, and then uses it as its primary means of concealment and psychological control.
And this mechanism, it isn't just a chapter in ancient history. It's an instruction manual for critical thought in the modern world. We're left with the profound necessity to question the ornaments, the art, the rhetoric, the philosophy, the media that surround our modern Leviathans.
Right.
Are we, like the Athenians, admiring the beautiful lines and colors of our architectural or cultural achievements while systematically ignoring the forced labor and systemic extraction that keeps the whole structure standing? We are still judging the value of our societies by their aesthetics rather than by the fundamental humanity of their daily operations.
And the authors argue that the entire military-political narrative is merely a tale of cruelty and war between rival Leviathans trying to eat each other. The only human parts, the only parts that matter to the integrity of the individual, are those instances of resistance, rejection, and withdrawal.
So that leads to the final provocative thought that we have to wrestle with.
If we accept this idea that art, philosophy, and even media often serve only to mask the state's armor and maintain individual conformity, then what cultural institution today, one that we universally admire as a source of freedom and enlightenment, is actually serving as the most effective, most beautiful concealment for the modern Leviathan?
What is the contemporary version of counting the metrical strophes in a piece of ancient text instead of truly listening to the spiritual core that inspired it?
That's the question.
That is the deep dive. We encourage you to continue this exploration, to question the ornaments, and to see past the mask. We'll see you next time.